In the cold winter of 1692, the small Puritan settlement of Salem Village, Massachusetts, became the stage for one of the darkest chapters in American history, the Salem Witch Trials. What started as a few strange illnesses and fits among young girls quickly spiraled into a terrifying wave of accusations, trials, and executions fueled by fear, superstition, and suspicion. The Puritan settlers were deeply religious and lived by strict moral codes. Their worldview was shaped by a belief in the constant battle between good and evil, with the devil lurking behind every shadow. To them, witchcraft was not just a superstition but a real, dangerous force that could corrupt souls and bring ruin to the community. It all began in early 1692, when two young girls, Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, daughters and relatives of Reverend Samuel Paris, started exhibiting strange behaviors. They convulsed, screamed, and claimed to see invisible spirits tormenting them. Desperate for answers, the community turned to local doctor William Griggs, who could find no physical cause for their afflictions. Instead, he suggested that the girls were bewitched. Soon, fear spread like wildfire. Other girls in the village began showing similar symptoms. In a society where the supernatural was accepted as fact, the finger quickly pointed to witchcraft. Accusations began to fly, first naming Tituba, Reverend Paris's Caribbean slave, as the source of the evil influence. Under pressure, Tituba confessed to practicing witchcraft and claimed others in the village were involved. This confession ignited the powder keg. More people were accused, many on flimsy or fabricated evidence. The court relied heavily on spectral evidence, claims that the accused spirit or shape appeared to the victims in visions or dreams, which was impossible to disprove. The trials were swift and merciless. Dozens of accused were imprisoned, and 19 men and women were eventually executed by hanging. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death under heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. But why did a community so focused on faith and order descend into such chaos? The reasons were complex. Tensions between neighbors, property disputes, fears of Native American attacks, and a rigid theocratic society all played their part. By the end of 1692, the hysteria began to subside. Prominent figures, including ministers and judges, publicly regretted their roles in the trials. The colony eventually compensated the families of the victims and took steps to prevent such injustice from recurring. The Salem Witch Trials remain a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of mass hysteria, the abuse of power, and the fragility of justice when fear replaces reason. As the hysteria escalated in Salem Village, the social fabric of the community began to unravel. The initial accusations created a ripple effect, turning neighbors into enemies and friends into foes. At the heart of this tragedy were complex social, economic, and religious tensions that had long simmered beneath the surface. Salem Village was not a peaceful, unified community. Disputes over land ownership and parish leadership divided families and neighbors. Some villagers wanted to break away from Salem town, seeking autonomy, while others opposed the division. These underlying conflicts created fertile ground for suspicion and resentment to grow. In this volatile environment, the young girls' accusations provided an outlet for expressing personal grudges and settling scores. People accused their rivals of witchcraft, knowing that even a hint of suspicion could lead to arrest and ruin. The courts often accepted accusations without solid proof, relying heavily on spectral evidence, a controversial and highly subjective form of testimony where victims claimed to see the apparition or shape of the accused tormenting them. One of the most infamous accusers was Ann Putnam Jr., who, along with her mother and other young girls, testified against numerous neighbors. Many of those accused were respected members of the community, including Rebecca Nurse, a devout and elderly woman known for her kindness. Despite her reputation, Rebecca was convicted and sentenced to death, a shocking example of how hysteria overrode reason and justice. The legal process itself was deeply flawed. The Special Court of Oyer and Terminer was established to try witchcraft cases, but it was heavily biased towards conviction. Defendants had limited rights, and the use of spectral evidence meant that denial of guilt held little weight. Furthermore, confessions, sometimes extracted under duress, were often used to implicate others, fueling a vicious cycle of accusations. Giles Corey's tragic fate highlighted the brutal nature of the trials. Refusing to plead guilty or not guilty, he was subjected to peine forte et dure, a form of torture involving heavy stones placed on his chest to force a plea. He endured days of agony before dying. His last words reportedly, "More weight." His courage became a symbol of resistance against injustice. The executions had a chilling effect on the community. 19 people were hanged, including women and men from different social standings. Additionally, one man was pressed to death, and several others died in jail awaiting trial. Families were torn apart, and the fear of being the next victim haunted everyone. However, cracks began to appear in the foundation of the witch hunt. Doubts grew among ministers and officials about the validity of spectral evidence. Increase Mather, a prominent Puritan minister, publicly condemned the use of such evidence, warning that it was unreliable and dangerous. Gradually, the court stopped accepting spectral evidence, and many convictions were overturned. Governor William Phips eventually intervened, dissolving the court of Oyer and Terminer and replacing it with a new court that was more cautious. By May 1693, the remaining accused were released, and the trials effectively ended. In the aftermath, the colony grappled with guilt and sorrow. Public apologies were made, and the government compensated the victims' families. The trials left a lasting scar on the collective memory of the community and the nation as a whole. Today, the Salem Witch Trials stand as a powerful reminder of how fear and fanaticism can lead to injustice and tragedy. They encourage us to question mass hysteria, to uphold the principles of fair trial and evidence, and to protect the vulnerable from persecution. Beyond the immediate tragedy, the Salem Witch Trials offer a profound glimpse into the culture, beliefs, and fears of late 17th century Puritan New England. To truly understand what happened, we must examine the worldview of the people involved. The Puritans believed in a literal interpretation of the Bible and saw the world as a battleground between God and Satan. They feared the devil's influence everywhere, and witchcraft was perceived as a direct alliance with dark forces. This fear was compounded by the harsh and uncertain life in the New World, where disease, harsh winters, and conflicts with Native Americans were constant threats. This belief system framed the trials as a spiritual war. The accused witches were seen not just as criminals but as agents of Satan who threatened the moral and physical safety of the community. Confession was often the only way to save one's life, and many accused confessed under immense pressure, hoping for mercy. The role of women in Puritan society also shaped the events. Women were expected to be submissive and pious. Those who deviated from societal norms, through outspoken behavior, independence, or unconventional beliefs, were vulnerable to suspicion. Many of the accused were women who challenged or unsettled the patriarchal order in subtle ways. Another factor was the unsettled political and social environment. Massachusetts Bay Colony faced external threats from Native American tribes during King William's War, which fueled anxiety. Internally, the community was divided by religious factionalism and economic rivalries. The witch trials became a way to channel these tensions and target scapegoats. The psychological element cannot be overlooked. Some historians suggest that the afflicted girl's fits and accusations might have been driven by a complex mix of psychological distress, desire for attention, and manipulation by adults around them. The exact causes remain debated, but the resulting hysteria spread rapidly, engulfing Salem and nearby villages. The legacy of the Salem Witch Trials extends far beyond 1692. It has influenced American culture, literature, and law. The phrase witch hunt has become synonymous with unjust persecution based on fear and suspicion. Salem itself has transformed into a place of reflection and remembrance. Museums, memorials, and historical tours educate visitors about the trial's lessons. The trials serve as a stark warning about the consequences of abandoning reason and justice. Understanding the Salem Witch Trials is essential not just as a historical episode, but as a timeless lesson on human nature. How fear can warp communities, how power can be abused, and how the quest for truth must always prevail over hysteria. The Salem Witch Trials also highlighted critical failures in the justice system that resonate even today. The reliance on spectral evidence. Claims that the spirit or specter of the accused was tormenting the victims was particularly controversial. This kind of evidence was inherently unverifiable, making it almost impossible for the accused to defend themselves. Judges such as William Stoughton aggressively accepted spectral evidence, leading to swift convictions. Many accused individuals were condemned based not on physical proof but on the fearful testimonies of young girls. This blurred the line between fact and fantasy, causing devastating consequences. As the trials unfolded, some voices called for reason and caution. Magistrate John Hathorne and Minister Cotton Mather, though deeply religious, expressed unease with the proceedings. Cotton Mather wrote extensively about witchcraft but later warned against hasty judgments and the dangers of spectral evidence. The impact on families and communities was profound. Accused witches often lost their property and social standing. Their families were stigmatized, and the social fabric was torn apart by distrust and paranoia. The trauma endured by survivors and their descendants lasted generations. One poignant example is that of Elizabeth Proctor, wife of John Proctor, a man who openly criticized the trials. Elizabeth was accused despite her reputation for honesty and integrity. John tried to defend her, but both were imprisoned. John was ultimately executed, while Elizabeth was spared after giving birth in prison. Their story captures the tragic human cost of the hysteria. After the trials ended, Massachusetts took steps to reform its legal system. The use of spectral evidence was banned, and future trials demanded stricter standards of proof. The tragedy of Salem became a catalyst for safeguarding legal rights, including the presumption of innocence and the right to legal counsel. In the centuries since, the Salem Witch Trials have inspired countless works of art, literature, and scholarship. Arthur Miller's play The Crucible famously used the trials as an allegory for McCarthyism and the Red Scare, showing how fear and political agendas can destroy innocent lives. Today, Salem embraces its complex history, balancing between remembering its painful past and educating about the dangers of extremism and mass hysteria. Annual events, museums, and walking tours keep the memory alive, ensuring the lessons of 1692 are never forgotten. The Salem Witch Trials stand as a stark reminder of the catastrophic consequences that arise when fear, superstition, and unchecked authority converge. These events show how fragile justice can become in times of crisis and how easily societal tensions can erupt into violence against the innocent. In the aftermath, the community of Salem struggled to rebuild trust and heal deep wounds. Families who lost loved ones lived with grief and shame, while others sought forgiveness for their roles in the hysteria. The colony's leaders recognized the need for reform to prevent such miscarriages of justice from recurring. Over time, the trials became emblematic of the perils of mass hysteria and scapegoating. The phrase witch hunt entered the cultural lexicon as a metaphor for baseless persecution fueled by fear and prejudice. The legacy of Salem also shaped American legal principles. The emphasis on evidence-based trials, protections against coerced confessions, and the right to a fair hearing all owe something to the painful lessons learned from 1692. Beyond law, the trials continue to resonate in literature, film, and popular culture, serving as cautionary tales about intolerance and the abuse of power. They challenge us to remain vigilant against the forces of fear and fanaticism that can still arise today. Visiting Salem today, one finds a town both proud and somber, honoring those who suffered and educating new generations about the dangers of allowing fear to override reason. Memorials and museums stand as quiet testaments to the lives lost and the enduring human spirit that seeks truth and justice. The Salem Witch Trials endure not just as a historical event, but as a timeless symbol, a call to question, to seek fairness, and to protect the innocent from the shadows of suspicion.